Hi, welcome to Crime Clueless. We're your hosts. I'm Jenna.
And I'm Laura.
Before we get into today's case, we have a quick favor to ask. If you've been enjoying our podcast, the best way to support us is totally free and takes about 10 seconds. On Apple Podcasts, just scroll down on our show page and tap those stars. 5 stars is good. If you want to say something nice, even better, we would love if you would drop us a short review. On Spotify, if you hit the 3 dots at the top of the screen, it has an option to rate, and it really helps boost us in the algorithm. Makes us look cooler than we are. If you're listening on Audible, scroll to the bottom of our episode list and tap Write a Review. Easy, helps more than you know. And if you're watching or listening on YouTube, make sure you're subscribed. It also helps boost us in the algorithms. And it makes a huge difference in helping new people find the show. And it lets platforms know that listeners are enjoying Crime Clueless. Thank you so much for the love. It means the world.
Yes, it does.
You ready for our case today?
I am.
All right. It's May 30th, 2016. A woman walks into the York County Sheriff's Office in South Carolina and tells deputies something happened at her house that morning. She says she was downstairs trying to load a crossbow. She was having some trouble with it, so she carries it upstairs to where her husband is asleep in bed. And that's when it goes off. The bolt strikes him in the back of the head. He wakes up yelling and bleeding from this wound. And when deputies ask him about it, this man who was just shot in the head by his own wife with a crossbow, he tells them he doesn't believe that she was trying to kill him. He says it was an accident. She says it was an accident. No charges are filed. Life goes on. 2 years later, that same husband is dead. And this time, there's no accident to point to. There is 3 days of him getting sicker and sicker until he collapses at the bottom of a staircase in his beautiful home that's built to look like George Washington's Mount Vernon. The chemical that killed him, it's something almost all of us have sitting in a medicine cabinet right now. This is the story of the Claytons. So before we get into what actually killed Stephen Clayton, we need to talk about who these two people were, because on paper, this might seem like a pretty unlikely couple.
Okay, I'm ready to find out about this story. Sounds really interesting.
Well, Stephen Clayton, everyone called him Steve. He was born in Miami Beach in 1954. His dad was a big influence on him. Steve's obituary actually says that Steve spent decades donating to St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital, specifically because it was his father's favorite charity. And he kept that going after his dad had passed. Steve grows up in Hialeah and Miami Springs. He becomes this standout athlete in high school. He was great at everything: wrestling, football, track. He works his way through Florida State as a construction laborer and plasterer, and he becomes a CPA.
So really, he's a self-made guy.
Totally, very self-made. And in the 80s, he starts this company called Physical Therapy Resources. It takes off in an incredible way. They get branches all over the country, and he does so well that he's able to fully retire at 40 years old.
I'm sorry, at 40? That's incredible.
Totally.
Sounds like the dream.
I would love that, right?
Yeah, for sure.
He sells his interest in the company and spends the rest of his life doing what he actually loved. And that's not just partying on a boat somewhere. This is a guy who becomes a wrestling coach at multiple schools. He mentors kids for decades. He funds scholarships. Friends describe him as the kind of person who was equally comfortable talking to a groundskeeper as he was talking to a CEO. He was also known for throwing completely lavish parties: fireworks, live music, the whole production. This was not a quiet retirement. He was doing everything he loved, and he was having a good time.
It really sounds like the way to retire. You have enough money, you can really do what you want. Being the wrestling coach, mentoring kids, that sounds like what he really wanted to do, and how amazing that he did get to do that.
Completely.
And those parties sound really epic.
They do.
Pyrotechnics, big deal. Like, that's really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. On top of all of that, he wrote poetry, he collected fine art and sculptures. He was obsessed with gardening, specifically importing these exotic plants. His old Fort Lauderdale home actually got featured in the local paper because the garden he had was so elaborate.
Wow, that's really cool. Not just this rich guy, he's got a whole interior life too.
Yeah, he really does, which makes him this kind of larger than life figure. And by the time he meets Lana, he's been married a lot.
Okay, how much is a lot?
Well, court records put it at 6 ex-wives.
Wow.
Now, and this took a lot of digging on my end. I initially found conflicting information about whether Steve had kids of his own. One report says yes, grown kids from a previous relationship. Another says no kids at all. But his actual obituary clears this up. He didn't have biological kids, but he had stepchildren, at least 2, plus grandkids he clearly loved, all listed right alongside his wife in the family section. So my guess is that different reporters heard his kids secondhand and didn't realize that they were talking about Lana's kids from her side.
Okay, so kind of that contraindication resolves itself once you see the actual family.
Yeah, exactly. So Steve's on marriage number 7 when he meets Lana Sue online. She's a VA nurse in Charlotte. She's quiet by most accounts. A wallflower is actually the word one of Steve's friends used to describe her.
So kind of that opposites attract theory there.
That's what it sounded like, and basically what everyone thought that knew them. They get married in 2013, and Steve does something after this marriage that's very Steve. He restores this massive lakefront estate on Lake Wylie into an exact replica of George Washington's Mount Vernon.
So he built his own Mount Vernon.
Essentially, yeah. And Lake Wylie is in South Carolina. County records value the home at $822,000. Plus, he owned the lot right next door, which was valued at $385,000. So conservatively, over $1 million with just those 2.
So he's got money, gorgeous house, poetry writing, gardener, or the poetry writing gardener marries this quiet nurse. All sounds pretty good so far.
Right. And then in May of 2016 is the crossbow incident.
Okay. Sounds like an interesting, I don't know who just carries a crossbow around their house, but okay.
That's funny because I actually did try to find out why they just had a crossbow.
Yeah, why do
hanging
you even
out.
have one unless you're a hunter, I guess?
Right. And I could not find anywhere why they had this crossbow just hanging out downstairs.
Yeah.
And also why Lana is trying to load it in the first place and then it accidentally goes off.
Yeah. In quotes there. It's
Yeah.
very interesting.
That's literally how the original police report phrases it. Now, the bolt hits him in the back of the head. Like I said, he wakes up yelling and bleeding. And in that same 2016 report, Lana gives deputies a pretty detailed picture of what the marriage was like at that point. She says that Steve was mentally abusive, had mood swings, and could be nice to cruel in a moment. But she specifically tells police in her own words in 2016 that he never hit her.
And he backs up this accident story with the crossbow.
Completely. He tells officers he does not believe that Lana was trying to kill him. He even offers up maybe a sleepwalking theory as an alternative explanation. So there are no charges and there's no follow up. Everyone moves on.
So that's it. No charges, no deeper dive into this incident.
Not at the time, because both are saying totally an accident.
Interesting.
Yes. So that's it for 2 years. But here's where it gets unsettling because this isn't the last version of the crossbow story we get. Years later, in a taped interview for CBS's 48 Hours, Lana tells it a third way.
So what she's saying to CBS 48 hours is different than what they originally told the police.
Yes, from what she originally told police, and also version 2 at her 2020 sentencing. So in version 1, in that police report in 2016, total accident, struggling to load it, accidentally went off. Version 2 at her 2020 sentencing, not really addressed directly, but her attorneys are now painting this marriage full of physical abuse, which, if you remember, in 2016, she said was not the case.
Right.
And then version 3 on camera, years after the fact, Lana says this, quote, I was trying to protect myself from him because he was, coming at me. And I had picked up the crossbow and turned and I just shot it at him.
Interesting. So now she's saying it was self-defense, not an accident at all.
Correct. In her own words, on tape, self-defense. Now, here's the thing. Steve's nephew, Nick French, and his other nephew named Chris, they didn't even hear this version until after Steve had already passed away. For 2 years, they believed the accident story, same with everyone else.
So what do they think once they hear this, quote, real version?
Well, they're asked exactly that point blank in the same interview, actually. And Nick is asked whether he thinks it was attempted murder. And his answer, quote, absolutely, I think it was. Yeah. Chris is asked the same thing, and his answer is, quote, 100%. We think that was her first attempt at doing this, end quote.
So they were thinking it was self-defense too? Or just that she was like, it was her first attempt at murder?
They think now, in hindsight, it was her first attempt at murder.
Did they think it was self-defense? Did they think he was abusive in that way?
No, actually. And this is the other side of that same interview, which I think is important to include because Steve isn't here to give his version, right?
Right.
When they're asked directly about Lana's claims that Steve was abusive towards her, both of them push back hard. Their exact words, quote, we never saw any evidence of that. There was no record of anything like that, end quote.
Interesting. So the same two guys who are 100% certain the crossbow was attempted murder are also completely certain abuse never happened.
Yes, right. Which I think is worth sitting with on its own. They're confident on both counts, but they're also not exactly neutral witnesses. I mean, they loved Steve. They're not going to have seen every private moment of a 5-year marriage. And abuse, especially the emotional kind that Lana originally described back in 2016, doesn't always leave a record or outside of the household to notice. Now, I want to be really clear here because this is a family member or family members giving their opinion in a documentary interview years after the fact with the benefit of hindsight and a lot of grief behind it. It's not a criminal charge, and she was never prosecuted for the 2016 incident as its own crime. But it's a genuinely striking thing to hear the people who loved Steve say out loud on the record once they finally had all the pieces.
And Lana herself, does she ever seem to grapple with any of this? Like, does she come across as someone hiding something or someone who genuinely believes her own version?
Well, honestly, there's a moment in that same interview that I think about a lot. At one point, talking about Steve, she says, and almost like she catches herself, she says, quote, I feel I'm painting a bad picture of him. He wasn't, a monster.
That's a strange thing to say if you're building a case that he abused you for 5 years.
It is. I'm not going to pretend that I know what to make of that. Maybe it's someone genuinely conflicted about a complicated relationship. Maybe it's something else. I just think it's worth including here because it doesn't fit neatly into either the quote monster husband story or the innocent victim story. It's just this odd human unresolved moment.
Did any of his ex-wives have any comment on this about their relationships with him?
I tried so hard to find out more about them. I could find nothing.
Oh,
Only how many times he'd been married. I couldn't find how long or if they had any comments on that. I
interesting.
looked through everything. And I thought at one point I had found one ex-wife, but it was a different Stephen Clayton. So I don't know.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I feel like that would really help
Yeah.
determine what that relationship was. And honestly, I mean, when he dies in 2018, he's 64 years old. That's quite a few times to be married in
Yeah.
such a short time. But his family kind of says that he's just incredibly social and fun, and that none of those ended on bad terms. So
Interesting.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking of some of our other cases with wives who died who had husbands who had been married multiple times, and the wives all said the same thing that he was
Right.
abusive and all of these things. I was wondering if that was kind of something that was mentioned in this case too. But interesting, you couldn't
That's,
even find any of them.
I know, because that is exactly why I wanted to find out, like, was this a pattern
Yeah.
or not?
Well, and you would kind of think too, if it was like he was abusive in previous relationships, maybe one of those wives would step up and her if it is a self defense claim and Lana's defense too. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like her lawyers would have been able to track them down and find
Yeah.
out. And maybe I'm not saying that it does, but maybe that does tell us something that they
Maybe,
didn't have those wives to step in and
maybe that
participate in
wasn't
the
the case.
trial.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Maybe they talked to them and they didn't have any of those same claims. It's
very
interesting.
possible.
So this all leaves us, 2 years later, walking into July of 2018.
Right. And in 2018, we have a marriage that from the outside looked completely fine, but you do have one documented, quote, accident with a deadly weapon. Over the years, multiple explanations for it. And as we're about to find out, a husband who just 2 months before he passed away confided in his nephew that the marriage wasn't what he thought it would be.
Interesting. So he was saying things weren't fine just before he passed.
Yeah. On July 19th, 2018, this is when everything changes. This is the day that Lana starts putting tetrahydrozoline, which is the active chemical in Visine eye drops, into Steve's drinking water.
Oh, geez. And just to be clear, I mean, that's a real medical thing you can buy over the counter by Zine eye drops, not like some poison or like antifreeze or some of the other ones that we've talked about.
Right. This one is very real, very dangerous if you're not using it in the intended method. Tetrahydrozoline is a vasoconstrictor. It, is what makes the redness in your eyes go away, and that's because it shrinks the blood vessels. It's also in nasal sprays. But if you ingest it, like actually swallow it, it does the same thing to the blood vessels throughout your whole body. It causes your blood pressure to crash, your heart rate drops, and in large enough doses, it's lethal.
And she's putting this into his drinking water for 3 days.
3 days, July 19th through July 21st. And according to what Lana later tells investigators, Steve is getting sicker and sicker that whole time. He's dizzy, he's got vertigo, he's essentially bedridden.
Does anybody call a doctor? Does he go to the doctor, get checked out?
That's the thing. No. Lana tells police later that he didn't want to see a doctor. He didn't want to have these symptoms looked at. He's just suffering at home for 3 days while his wife, a trained nurse, by the way, is the one taking care of him.
That's interesting. That detail is doing a lot of work. That's not looking good for Miss Lana.
No. On July 21st, Lana's outside doing yard work. She comes back in, and that's when she finds him at the foot of the staircase in their home. And here's where the story she gives first responders gets important. She says he must have fallen.
Like falling down the stairs?
Right. fallen down the stairs, and on the surface, that tracks. He is found at the bottom of a staircase. He'd been feeling dizzy and unsteady for days. Emergency crews arrive, but they can't revive him. And at this point, the working theory is exactly what it looks like: a bad fall, maybe a heart attack brought on by whatever illness he'd been fighting.
So this could have just ended here, really. Case closed, sad accident. He got sick. This happened,
Right. And it almost does. Steve's funeral is held about 2 weeks later in the backyard of their home. Dozens of people show up. Friends talk about his generosity, what a character he was. And Lana's already made a decision about what happens next. She wants him cremated.
And let me guess, she doesn't want an autopsy either, right?
Exactly right. Which raises the first red flag because Steve's family, specifically his sister and his nephew, and this nephew happens to be a police officer, they're not comfortable with that. Something about the whole situation feels off to them. And so they push back. They want an autopsy done before anything else happens to his body.
And I do feel like a lot of times if people get older, they get sick, they just have some illness or they pass away, they don't always do an autopsy. So I don't feel like it's 100% red flag that she's saying they don't want an autopsy if he was old, sick. I mean, he wasn't old, but, patients that are older, when they pass away, they don't always do an autopsy.
Right. Especially if it looks like it might have been a heart attack or,
Yeah.
and then that
sick
caused
and
a
dizzy and he
fall.
fell down the stairs.
Right. It's pretty surface believable story.
Yeah. Does she agree to do the autopsy when they push back?
She doesn't fight it from what the record shows, but it delays her cremation plan. And the family's suspicion is enough to get it moving. So an initial autopsy is performed. And interestingly, it turns up something like heart disease, which again would have fit that story pretty neatly.
Yeah. But that's not really the end of it. That story seems to fit nicely, but
yeah, if it was, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation right now.
Yeah, exactly.
The family requests a full toxicology screening in addition to the normal autopsy that they would do. The toxicology takes weeks to come back. Weeks where, as far as the public record shows, everyone is just waiting. Lana's already filed paperwork with the probate court, naming herself the sole beneficiary of Steve's estate.
Did he have a will?
Actually, hours after Steve's body is found, the same day, Steve's nephew, Chris, arrives at the house and Lana asks him to help her start organizing Steve's affairs. And Chris, very reasonably, says the first thing they need to do is find the will. And this is because Steve had actually asked Chris specifically to be his executor of his will. Chris had seen the document himself. He knows for a fact it exists. And when he says this to Lana, she tells him, well, there is no will. Chris pushes back. He says, no, there's a will. I know that there is. I've seen it. And according to Chris, Lana stands up and repeats, there is no will, and walks into the house. This isn't, secondhand or reconstructed. This is Chris's own account of a conversation he was part of on the record years later. Now, no one ever finds out what actually happened to that will. Not officially anyways. It's never been recovered. But there is a detail from that same CBS interview that I think answers the question about as clearly as it's ever going to get answered. Neighbors told Steve's nephew that the morning after Steve's death, they watched Lana out in the backyard burning something in the fire pit. And just the morning after, years later, when Chris takes the CBS crew back to that same spot, he says, quote, this is the fire pit. His whole life in paper was burned right here. So that's his personal read on it. And I want to be clear, this is his opinion, not a proven fact. He also said, quote, my personal opinion is that's the first thing she burned. So it's not that she just denied it existed. It may have already been burned by the time they talked about it. And nobody can prove exactly what was burned, but the timing, plus denying the will exists on day one, it's hard to look past.
Oh, that's not good.
There actually is a newspaper announcement that anybody that has anything that they're owed, like she's in charge of the estate, here's how you contact, and it even had their home address on it.
Oh,
It's
interesting.
interesting.
And she's doing all of this before the toxicology has even come back.
Right. She's the one who ends up appointed as personal representative of his estate through the York County Probate Court. And like I said, this is public record and it's filed in the weeks right after his death.
So while everyone else is grieving and waiting on test results, she's already handling the estate paperwork. Just moving right along.
Moving right along. Now, when the toxicology results land and they're not looking for heart disease anymore, they're finding tetrahydrozoline at levels nobody would expect in a man who's never supposed to have any reason to have it in his system at all.
And so this is really when it stops being an accident story.
Yeah, right when they see those toxicology reports. And what happens next is where this case goes from a sad, unexplained death to something the entire country is talking about within a matter of days. So here's something about how this case almost didn't happen at all. Tetrahydrozoline, like we said, the chemical in Visine, is not something labs typically check for in a standard autopsy toxicology screen.
Wait, so how did they even find it if that's not something they typically check for?
Well, that's the thing. The prosecutor in this case later says it outright in court. The chemical isn't normally tested for. It was only caught because Steve's family pushed hard enough for like the full toxicology workup. And that sample ended up going to a private lab, not just the standard county process.
So if the family hadn't pushed for it, all the extra testing, they probably wouldn't have found it. Even in the normal toxicology report, it would have stayed this sad, unexplained death.
Exactly. It would be a closed case. Heart disease, an unfortunate fall, grieving widow, end of story. The prosecutor's exact words at sentencing were, quote, "She almost got away with it."
Yeah, that's chilling.
It really is. And I want to pause on the coroner for a second here too, because her reaction says a lot about how unusual this chemical choice really was. So the coroner, her name's Sabrina, she later admitted she'd never even heard of the substance before this case. Her exact words, quote, "I was like, what is tetrahydrozoline? I don't know what that is. I had to look up what tetrahydrozoline even was."
So even the professional whose entire job is figuring out how people die had to Google it.
Exactly. She had to Google it, which tells you this wasn't some well-known method. Whoever did this either got lucky or knew exactly how far under the radar this chemical would fly. So once that toxicology comes back, this is late August of 2018. That's about 5 weeks after Steve died. Investigators now have a homicide investigation on their hands instead of a natural death. And Lana is brought in for questioning.
What does she tell them initially?
Well, and this part's almost hard to believe. She tells detectives that Steve was the one putting eye drops in his own coffee, like it was some kind of daily habit of his.
And that she, as a nurse, noticed this and didn't be like, why are you doing that? That's not good for you. You shouldn't be doing that.
Right? It's like your job makes that really unbelievable as your reasoning here.
Yeah. If I saw my husband doing something weird with his medications, I would be telling him, don't do that.
Right.
That's going to hurt you or something, you know?
Right. You have that background to know what Visine does, to the eyes, but then also to the rest of your body.
And I'd be like, who told you to do that?
Yeah.
Because don't listen to them.
Let's never listen to them ever again.
Yeah. Did she say, like, she was saying he was trying to complete suicide? Is that what she was saying he was trying to do?
I don't think So I think she was saying more like what you just mentioned, like he saw it somewhere as something that could help. And so he was doing it.
Oh, okay.
I don't believe she was pointing to him completing suicide. It doesn't last for very long because investigators flat out don't buy it. One detective on the case later says that explanation is medically implausible. There's no reason the shrug should be in someone's postmortem blood from casual voluntary use like that.
So are they saying that it wasn't just a couple drops that was being put in the coffee? It was a lot of the medication.
Yes, exactly.
It wasn't just 1 to 2 drops in his coffee for some bizarre health benefit he saw online.
Exactly.
It was intentional.
It was intentional and it was in really high doses. And at some point in the same window, the record isn't crystal clear on exactly which conversation it happens in. Lana does start giving investigators more. She tells them that Steve was controlling and manipulative. She herself brings up the crossbow again. And this is actually where that second version we talked about comes from. And in the same conversation, she also says something that changes everything. She tells them, okay, I did put Visine in his water.
So she just flat out confesses right there.
Basically, though, and this is important, even in this confession, she's not saying she meant to kill him. She tells investigators a coworker once mentioned that you could get back at somebody by putting Visine in their drink and it would just cause diarrhea, similar to like wedding crashers. If you guys have seen that and remember that part, it makes them miserable, is what she says. So, in her own words, quote, I squeezed it hard. I was so angry. I just wanted him to have diarrhea and be miserable for a day or two. Now, in that same conversation, she also gives investigators a window into what she says the marriage actually felt like day to day. She says, quote, I always walked on eggshells. I didn't know what Stephen I was going to come home to. He could be really nasty, you know. She says he'd call her names like stupid and that she never knew which version of him she'd get.
It's really sad if that's true, not just, that he was abusive, but what it actually felt for her day to day. And it was always a surprise if he was going to be nice or if he was going to be angry. That's hard too, if that's true.
Right. And I think that's worth including precisely because it's specific. It reads differently than like a blanket claim here. And whether you believe it explains what she did next is really up to you.
So her story the whole way through is I wanted to hurt him a little. I wanted to make him miserable. I didn't want to kill him.
Right. That's her position. And it does stay her position all the way through sentencing years later. But here's where the timeline gets really dark because after this questioning, investigators tell her they've secured a warrant to search her home and her phone.
Oh, and then what did they find? I'm guessing something bad on her phone.
Actually,
Or in her
before
house.
that,
Okay.
so neighbors say the last time they saw Lana was the night of August 29th around 9:30 p.m. She'd asked them to come over and, check in on the dogs and take care of them.
So wait, what day did he die? That was in
July
July.
21st.
So
this was August 29th.
So this is after he passed before they brought her in for questioning.
This is the day after she was brought in for questioning and they told her they had the search warrants.
Okay, so August 29th.
Yes.
After that. Okay.
The next morning on August 30th, a neighbor finds handwritten notes on the back deck table. They look like suicide notes. They also find a card for the detective that she's been talking to. The neighbor that finds this calls the sheriff's office directly. Police, fire, and EMS arrive at the house, and when they open the back door, officers say they're immediately hit by fumes.
Like gas?
Gas. They find Lana upstairs in a bedroom. She's breathing, but she's unconscious. She's rushed to Piedmont Medical Center in Rock Hill. Later reporting fills in more of the method. She'd also taken pills on top of turning on the gas stove.
So this happens, like you said, the day after she's told by investigators they're getting a warrant for her to search her.
Yes, they already have the warrant.
Okay.
Yep. Now, this obviously is going to raise a lot of questions later about what exactly was going through her mind at that moment and whether this is guilt or whether it's fear about what's coming and whether it's something else entirely. She does survive, though. And at her sentencing over a year later, she'll tell the court directly, after finding out the Visine was the cause of death, I did attempt to take my life as well. I couldn't live with the thought that I did such a terrible thing.
Okay. So she's, by her own account, saying this was out of guilt.
Yep, that's what she says in her own words in court. Whether you take that at face value is up to you. I'm not going to tell you how to feel about it. What I can tell you is what happens next, because less than 24 hours after she's found in that upstairs bedroom, Lana Sue Clayton is arrested. On August 31st, 2018, she's arrested. She's charged with murder and unlawful malicious tampering with food.
That second charge sounds almost clinical compared to the murder charge.
It really does. And that's the charge tied directly to the method. The idea that she contaminated something that he consumed. Now, because she's charged with murder under South Carolina law, she's not eligible for bond. She's presumed innocent legally, but she's going to sit in the York County Detention Center for the entire length of this case.
And how long does that end up being? How long is she there for?
We're talking about a year and a half before this resolves. Now, in those first few days, though, because this is where the story stops being this York County case and becomes a national one.
How fast does that happen usually?
Well, here it happened really fast. The Herald in Rock Hill breaks the story first on September 1st. And within days, like that same week, Inside Edition is interviewing Steve's friends in Lake Wylie. Good Morning America runs segments. The Washington Post picks it up. Jezebel. Even the BBC over in the UK runs a piece on it.
Wow, just for this local South Carolina case, it got really big.
Really big. And when reporters ask people in Lake Wylie why they think it's blown up this big, one of Steve's friends, a guy named Frank, who owned a restaurant that Steve used to frequent all the time, he actually says he's not totally sure either. His theory is that it's the method. Something about a common household item, an eye drop bottle sitting in basically everybody's bathroom being used in this way. He says it kind of feels relatable in this deeply unsettling way.
That's a good theory why it got so big, actually. It's not some exotic poison you've never heard of before, something that you buy off the black market or like things where people are ordering them from their medical office or things like that. It's over the counter.
Right. That's exactly it. It's not like it's ricin or something out of a spy movie. It's Visine. And once the case is public, this is when the 2016 crossbow incident gets pulled back out of the file. The solicitor's office, which is the elected prosecutor's office in South Carolina, they announce they're doing a full review of the entire relationship between Lana and Steve, specifically naming the crossbow shooting as something they're now looking at alongside this murder case.
Really? So 2 years later, that accident doesn't really look so accidental anymore.
It really doesn't.
It didn't really from the beginning to me, but
I know. I couldn't figure any part of that out. And I can't imagine what kind of damage that must have done to him.
Right? I was thinking that he was probably pretty lucky that he survived anyway.
Totally. Now, it is important. It's never actually charged as its own separate crime. Really, in this case, it becomes context, pattern evidence, essentially, for how prosecutors want the jury, or in this case, the judge, to understand who Lana is and what this marriage was like.
So I'm assuming she gets a lawyer right away, right?
Well, this is actually a whole subplot of its own. At first, she's denied a public defender. I mean, the assumption being that with a $1.2 million estate in the family, plus whatever other assets, she can afford private counsel. So her family actually hires an attorney just to go to court and argue the opposite. Lana has zero access to any of that money. Everything, the house, the land, the accounts, they're all solely in Steve's name.
Oh, that's interesting too.
It is.
So she's sitting in jail accused of killing a multimillionaire for his money, probably, and whatever else. And
Right.
she's broke.
Completely broke, according to the court filings. Her own lawyer says in court she has no access to any of it. She has no assets. She has no job now, no way to make a living. She has nothing. A probate judge ends up stepping in about 5 weeks after Steve's death and puts a member of his family in charge of the estate instead of Lana. So whatever she filed for in those first couple weeks, that does not stick.
And is the death penalty on the table here for this?
Yeah, it is. Because she's charged with murder and the allegation of poisoning is involved, this is legally a capital case in South Carolina. Prosecutors confirm at this stage that she could face the death penalty if she's convicted at trial, which is a pretty enormous shift from the version of this story that started with a man got dizzy and fell down some stairs.
Which is really scary for her, especially if she doesn't even have money to find the best lawyer to help and all of that. That's got to be scary for her too.
Yeah, that's real life hitting you square in the face.
I mean, you shouldn't murder your husband.
No, don't do that.
Don't do that. But hopefully she got some kind of attorney.
Public defender. I mean, it is crazy how close she was to getting away with it completely.
Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
Where does it go from here?
It is over a year of this case sitting in the system. They have pretrial motions, more digging into the marriage. And then in January of 2020, it all comes to a head in a courtroom. Now, here's the thing. I've been saying when she went to court a little bit loosely this whole time, but that's not actually what she ends up doing. On January 16th, 2020, Lana pleads guilty, so there is no trial.
Oh, what does she make some kind of deal, I'm guessing, to probably get death penalty off the table?
Yes, exactly. She pleads guilty to voluntary manslaughter and to tampering with a food or drug, which is a significant step down from the murder charge that she'd been sitting in jail on for a year and a half.
And why did the prosecutors agree to that? They had a pretty strong case.
They did, but that is one of the more interesting parts of this case. So prosecutors go on record and explain why they offered this deal. They say the type of poison used here, tetrahydrozoline, isn't something normally caught in a standard test. It took a private lab to find it. So there's this argument that proving premeditated murder, like first degree, beyond a reasonable doubt, in a case built on a chemical that almost nobody thinks to test for, carries real risk at trial. The plea guarantees a conviction and real prison time without rolling the dice with the jury.
And that makes sense, actually, because even though, they do have her confession that she did it, she also said she didn't know it was going to cause that, which is kind of hard to believe with her having a medical degree as a registered nurse. But maybe they also thought that could cause some reasonable doubt in some jurors' minds. If she said she didn't really look it up, she didn't 100% know what it would cause. She thought it was going to cause diarrhea and make him miserable. they could get some reasonable doubt
Yeah.
in a jury
And
from that.
if they don't even have the option and they have to show as premeditated, that's a lot
Yeah.
easier with, like you mentioned, when you have to order, say, through your work or some poison that you have to really go out of your way to get. This one's just sitting there staring at
Or
you.
antifreeze. I mean, you shouldn't drink antifreeze. I'm sure that there are
Huge
disclaimers and warnings on the bottle.
Yeah. So I think trying to get that first degree felt almost impossible when it's not something you go out of your way to acquire. So it really does make sense. Now, the hearing is a 4-hour deal. It's all in one day, and it plays out almost like two competing stories about who Lana Clayton actually is.
Okay, let's hear it.
So on the one side, you have Lana's defense attorneys, a man named Harry and a man named BJ. And they're building a picture of a woman shaped by trauma long before she ever met Steve. They get specific here in a way that I want to make sure I get right. So, trigger warning for sexual assault. They say that Lana was sexually abused as a child by an uncle, and that later, while she was serving in the US Air Force, she was raped not by one, but by 3 servicemen. And like the childhood abuse, they say it was never reported to anyone at the time.
Oh, that is a lot of trauma to be carried into a marriage, let alone one that might have problems on its own.
It really is. And her attorneys argue that history is exactly why, when things escalated with Steve, something in her broke rather than her simply walking away. On top of that, they're now arguing that the marriage itself was abusive. They say that Steve hit her, kicked her, and choked her throughout their 5 years together.
And this is probably where we come back to that 2016 report, even though she said it wasn't.
Specifically said that.
Yeah, she specifically said he didn't hit her, that it was just mental, emotional.
Emotional, but physical violence, explicitly, she said no. And now, 4 years later, from that 2016 report, her legal team is presenting a version where physical abuse was ongoing throughout the marriage. And really, it's impossible to tell you which version is true. I can only tell you those are 2 different accounts on the record, years apart.
That is a big shift. And even if it was emotional, mental abuse, that's a lot on somebody too.
It is.
But for her to explicitly say on record that it wasn't physical and now she's claiming it is, and maybe it wasn't and then it changed, but they're saying it was through the whole marriage, right?
Yeah. And there's a version of this that, maybe she doesn't want to leave him. She thinks if she says it is physical abuse, then they're going to be looking into everything the two of them have. Maybe he won't continue to say it's an accident anymore. And it becomes a whole separate, messy situation where she just wanted to keep it simple, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does.
But again, I can't say that with any records backing it up. It's the only thing I can think of for the shift, unless they're just saying that in trial. But it's kind of weird to say that when you can look at those records from 2016 and say what she said then without saying why the change.
Well, right? And maybe back in 2016 saying that because he's telling her, if you tell anybody this, I'm going to leave you. You have nothing to your name. You are broke. If you leave me, this lavish lifestyle we live will be taken away. I'll leave you out on the street. There is a lot that way. And maybe that's why she did say it. Or maybe she was scared. I feel like there's a lot of reasons why abuse victims don't say what's actually happening.
Yes.
And we see it all the time.
Yep.
And
even if you say it, a lot of times nothing happens.
Yeah.
And so,
or it gets worse. Nothing happens and then it gets worse once you get home.
Right.
It's really hard to say what was actually happening, even though she said it on record back in 2016.
Totally
We can't
agree.
really know what the truth actually was.
Yep. And, Steve isn't here to say his side, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
His two nephews say in that interview that they never saw evidence of that. But at the same time, again, they're an outside perspective who have this relationship with Steve. So
Yeah.
it makes it tricky.
How many times are people physically abused in a relationship for a long time, and even their closest, their family don't see it because they're really good at hiding it? It happens all the time.
Very
And
true.
they're his nephews. She's not going to go up to them and show them she's got a big bruise on her stomach or her upper thigh or something like that.
Right.
It's hard to know.
Yeah. I feel like the only two people who can really say one of them isn't there to say his side. So I do want to present the other side. But at the same time, there's a lot of reasons why she could have said that in 2016, whether it was true or not.
Yeah.
And at this point, she was 52 when it happened. But if you've spent 5 years out of your field, you're not working because you don't, need to, but none of the accounts are in your name. If they had gotten divorced, then it would have been really hard for her to start over.
Yeah.
Now, on the other side of the courtroom, you've got Steve's family and friends, and none of them are having any of the abuse narrative. His sister, Rosie, tells the court she's sickened to be in the same room with the monster who killed my brother. Steve's goddaughter is in tears when she says, Lana has fooled a lot of people. Please don't let her fool you.
So the family is saying this is some kind of performance, basically.
Yeah, that's their position, that Lana is, in the prosecution's own word, a manipulator. A friend of Steve's tells the court, my friend Steve was tortured for days, and he says whoever did this must have done some real research to pull it off this way.
And what does Lana say for herself at this point?
She apologizes. She stands up in court and says, I'm so sorry. But she also holds her line that whatever happened, it was never meant to kill him. Her exact words, I did impulsively put the Visine in Steven's drink, but I just did it to make him uncomfortable. I never thought it would kill him. And then later she follows up with, I never meant for this to happen.
Yeah, but it was 3 days. That's not just like one impulsive time to give him diarrhea. That's consistent.
Exactly. Yes, that is multiple days. And you're seeing the effect isn't what you thought it was. So why did you do it again?
I mean, you do it once and he gets dizzy with vertigo. He's not feeling good, but no diarrhea. So you keep doing it to make it worse and worse. It doesn't really make sense with that statement.
No. And that's exactly what Judge Paul Birch zeroes in on. He looks directly at her and says, how can you maintain you did this to teach him a lesson when it's obvious from the facts that you let him suffer for 3 days? You ignored him when these symptoms are dangerous, life-threatening. He also points out something that prosecutors had raised, that Steve's cell phone had been hidden from him, meaning even if he'd wanted to call for help, he couldn't have, which is a different version than he didn't want to get any medical attention.
Yeah, so she took his cell phone and hid it.
That's what the prosecution says. Along with that detail about the phone, Steve's sister Rosie, who lived in Florida, said that she'd been trying to reach Steve for about 3 days before she got the call that he had died. No replies to any of her messages. And she says that just wasn't like Steve. Normally, he'd never go quiet like that. She actually said it was odd enough that she'd started to worry even before she knew anything was wrong.
Wow. So they're really not buying this. I just wanted to make him uncomfortable version.
No, not really. Prosecutors, for their part, keep it simple. They say the motive here was greed, that Lana destroyed Steve's will after his death specifically, so there'd be nothing standing between her and his fortune. Deputy Solicitor Willie Thompson puts it bluntly, she wanted his money, and if there was no will, she'd get it all.
Where does the judge land on all of that?
Well, he says something pretty memorable before he hands down the sentence. He tells her, "What a tangled web we weave. Miss Clayton, you sure have tangled this one up." And later, reflecting on the case as a whole, he says this case is the strangest case he's ever had on the bench. His exact words were, "This one takes the cake as far as being bizarre."
Yeah. And what sentence does she get because she took a plea deal?
The charge carries a range of 2 to 50 years. So prosecutors ask for the maximum, defense asks for the 2-year minimum. Judge Birch kind of splits it, not quite down the middle, but he sentences her to 25 years in prison.
Yeah. So basically the mid between nothing and 50, but
Yeah, essentially, yes. And by this point, the case has become international news. It's been covered by outlets across the country. And by the time all this wraps up in early 2020, there are already documentary crews circling. This story is going to get told on national television more than once in the years that follow.
so that's Lana's case. Case closed, 25 years done. Does she get the option of parole earlier than that or 25 years?
That's a great question about parole. Under South Carolina law, voluntary manslaughter is classified as a no parole offense. And because of that, it falls under the state's 85% served requirement. So technically, after serving 21 years, she would become parole eligible. It's just she's not looking at serving a quarter or a third of her sentence, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Now, I want to tell you something that happened before the sentencing even took place. Something that actually happened while the case was still pending that I think says a lot about where Steve's family's heads were at.
Oh, okay.
So remember, right after Steve died in 2018, there is a quick funeral, that backyard celebration of life that we talked about, held while everyone still believed this was a tragic accident. Even if they didn't have proof that it wasn't. But once the case turns into a murder investigation, his family makes a decision. They don't want Steve's actual burial and memorial to happen under those circumstances. So they wait
Oh, how long do they wait for?
a full year.
Oh, wow.
Steve isn't actually laid to rest until July of 2019, which is about 6 months before Lana even enters her plea. The attorney helping coordinate it put it pretty plainly to the Sun Sentinel. He said the family wanted, quote, a service without the suspect, if you will, involved.
Interesting. So they're holding on to him in a sense until they can grave him on their own terms and not include Lana, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not some somber, black-clad affair either, by design. They bring him home to Fort Lauderdale, where he's from, and he's buried at Evergreen Cemetery right alongside his father. The service itself is described almost like a celebration. Light colors, summer attire encouraged. It's described by one attendee as having the feel of a cocktail party.
It kind of tracks with what we know about who Steve was and his parties and kind of his lifestyle.
Totally. It really does. And here's the detail that got me. The funeral home's attorney says he was struck by how many people in their 20s and 30s showed up specifically because of the scholarships that Steve had funded or because of his mentoring. People who their entire trajectories changed because this man decided to spend his retirement investing in kids he wasn't even related to.
So even a year later, grieving on their own terms, that's still the story people wanted to tell about him.
It is, which I love. They didn't want to talk about the eye drops or the crossbow, just This man who built himself up from a construction job and then spent his whole second act giving it away.
It's really a nice way to leave him.
I think so. And actually, even by the time of Lana's sentencing, when it made headlines in January of 2020, this wasn't being reported as an isolated case anymore. The same article that covered her sentencing also mentioned another eye drop poisoning already working its way through the courts nearby in Rowan County, North Carolina.
Oh, wow. So this is already starting to look like a pattern.
Yeah, it's starting to look like a pattern. And that brings me to the one I want to leave you with today, because this wasn't actually the last time this exact method showed up in a poisoning case in this part of the country. Not long after Lana's arrest made headlines, another case starts unfolding. One that investigators believe may have been directly inspired by what happened here. And in a lot of ways, it's even harder to untangle than this one was. And that is what we're going to talk about next week.
Oh, you're just going to leave us hanging.
A little bit. A little bit.
Okay.
The next one is truly so wild. It will be a two-parter.
Wow. All
Yeah.
right.
And actually, for that one, the court date is set for September 8th of this year.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So this one's kind of a precursor to next week's episode.
Yep. It is literally referenced in the docs on the case as he got this idea from Lana Clayton.
Wow. I was thinking that. I was like, these kinds of things, I mean, it's good to get it out there so people understand. But then you get people like that who copycat and it's terrible.
Yes, exactly. And I did wrestle with that exact thought because there is that, but also like in Wedding Crashers, they put it in, they drink while they're at a big dinner. Everyone was like folded their arms, eyes are closed, they're saying a prayer, reach across, put it in. Terrible stomach pain all night, but totally fine. And that is not what happens. So I do think it's important to know how dangerous this is.
Absolutely. Especially when they're showing it in a TV form. And maybe that's what Lana was saying too. Like, oh, my friend saw this in this show and told me this is what's going to happen. And I thought I'd do that too. Right. Whether she actually did know or not, that's a plausible theory that she thought this was going to happen and it didn't. Mm-hmm. And it is important for people to know how dangerous it is. Yeah, like you said.
100%. So we'll talk about it some more next week.
All right.
Well, thank you for joining us for this episode of Crime Clueless. If you want to learn more about this case, see the resources that we used to write it, head over to our website, crimeclueless.com. And all of our cases are listed under blog. And I would love to know what you think about this. If you remember seeing it in the news or in any of those like 48 hours, you can connect with us. We are at Crime Clueless on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube. We would love to hear your thoughts or theories, any feedback. You can find Crime Clueless anywhere you listen to podcasts. And as always, remember, refuse to be clueless, careless, or caught off guard.
Not today, murderers.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.